about the fact that we have got to know today, Saudi Arabia, together with some of the smaller Gulf country nations, have vowed to match their nuclear enrichment capabilities with whatever level Iran, your country, is being permitted in the possible deal with the United States. What do you make of this kind of decision coming from Saudi Arabia and other countries?
I don't think for the Iranians this is very important at all. From the perspective of Tehran, any country that is a member of the International Atomic Energy Agency and follows the regulations of the NPT, as Iran has done, is allowed to enrich uranium. Whether the Saudis and the others are able to have that capability is another thing, because these countries are heavily reliant on the West, and they don't really have many indigenous capabilities in any of the high-tech industries altogether. But I think for the Iranians, what is important is not whether the Saudis have a peaceful nuclear program. For the Iranians, what is important is that the Saudis are exporting Wahhabism and extremist organizations across the region. At the moment, the Saudis are helping Al-Qaeda in Yemen, as well as in Syria, among other areas. And that is the major concern, alongside the bombing campaign against the people of Yemen.
Okay, I don't want our program to be a attacking stage for your two countries, but let me just want to clarify some of the things concerning your country. At this moment, under the current deal between the United States and Iran, if it's going to be achieved, 5,000 centrifuges are likely to be maintained, which means they could be enriched in the future. Secondly, research and development of enrichment and nuclear technologies from Iran are likely to be maintained as well, which means, Professor Morandi, many argue, exactly that is going to provide Iran with the capability of developing nuclear powers in the future. As long as time goes by, you will have that. What do you make of this kind of argument against you?
Well, I think if we look at history, in the 1980s, when Saddam Hussein invaded Iran with Western support, Saddam was provided with chemical weapons to use against the Iranian people. And of course, the United States, the Europeans, as well as the Saudis, among others, they helped the United States, Saddam Hussein, both financially as well as logistically. Yet, despite the fact that many thousands of innocent Iranians were slaughtered by the chemical weapons, Iran refrained from producing its own chemical weapons because the Iranians believe that this is these weapons of mass destruction.
We're talking about nuclear weapons now.
So Iran has a very well. The point is that Iran's track record with regards to weapons of mass destruction is very positive. In other words, even during the worst circumstances, Iran, when they said that it is immoral and unacceptable according to our religious and moral principles, the Iranians did not produce or use them. And the same is true now. The Iranians have said that we do not believe in nuclear weapons. They go against our fundamental beliefs. And there's never been any evidence provided that Iran has ever pursued anything but a peaceful nuclear program. On the other hand, the United States is silent about the fact that Israel, for example, has hundreds of nuclear weapons. So from the Iranian perspective, again, the issue is basically political. It's not about Iran's nuclear program, really. In fact, it's basically because Iran has become an independent country outside the Western sphere of influence.
Well, Iranians might argue it is political reasons when it comes to developing the nuclear program, even nuclear program which might lead to the producing of nuclear weapons. But I'm also now being joined by Professor Raymond Tanter from the University of Michigan from the United States. Mr. Tanter, I'm sure you got bits and pieces coming from the argument from Professor Morandi in Iran. What do you think about under the current possibility of deal between U.S. and Iran?
Well, Professor Morandi makes an eloquent case. The only problem is that he beats up on the wrong actors. He should really criticize the Iranian regime. I don't think he will, though, so I shall. Iran is now a threshold nuclear power and playing what I call the long game, and we in America are playing the short game. we're talking about keeping Iran from becoming a threshold nuclear power. But Iran has enough centrifuges, even if it goes from 19,000 to 6,000, to be considered a nuclear threshold state, which is enough to intimidate the region. And the great Persian country is thousands of years old in terms of history.
All right.
And it can wait out the 10 years, and the notion that sanctions can be snapped back 10 years from now, the notion that Iran will not be able to do research and development at hidden sites like Lavazan 3 that the National Council of Resistance of Iran exposed on February 24th, and the IAEA is trying to get some permission to investigate not only Lavazan 3 but also Lavazan Xi'an.
So your point is,
and
Professor.
Parchin.
So your point is, sir.
My point is simple: that the Iranian regime is the problem and should not be a part of the solution with respect to the nuclear talks.
Okay, I will let Professor Morandi to briefly respond to that with a few sentences, and I'll come back to the Beijing studio with Mr. Teng. Professor Morandi, your turn.
Well, I think it's obvious that, first of all, the international community has traditionally supported Iran's position. The non-aligned movement, which constitutes 3/5 of the countries of the world, have always supported Iran's case. And the Chinese and the Russians have repeatedly said that Iran's nuclear program has been peaceful, and there's never been any sign that it is anything but peaceful. With regards to the sites that your guest mentions, he quotes what is a terrorist organization. That terrorist organization fought alongside Saddam Hussein during the 8-year war with Iran. But those sites, the Lavizan sites that he's talking about, have been actually investigated twice. The IAEA has visited those sites twice, and they found nothing. So the fact remains that Iran has a clean bill of health. The United States is carrying out a media campaign. But you know, the facts are facts. There has never been any evidence. All Iranian sites are have been monitored by the IAEA.
Okay.
And the U.S. ally Israel has nuclear weapons.
All right.
Iran doesn't
Okay.
and doesn't intend
There
to
we
have
go. There we go. We've given each of you a lot of time already. You have already presented your points very eloquently. Now let's come back to the Beijing studio with Mr. Teng here sitting with us. Two goals.
Yeah.
If we look at the deal. One is to make sure the United States might be able to buy, quote unquote, 10 years before Iran could have the capability of producing any nuclear weapon. Secondly, it is going to lift the sanctions against Iran. Only with that, Iran would be able to agree to what the deal has indicated. But the thing is, none of the two now has got the guarantee.
Yeah.
As a result of that, or probably due to that, the US Congress has not approved that. Enormous difficulties also at different capitals as well. Now we look at the Gulf countries just for an example. Is this deal really pragmatic?
No, I don't think, because the framework agreement reached early last month actually was a compromise among the parties concerned, especially the United States. You know, President Obama preferred to have some legacy, you know, for his presidency, and you know, we have witnessed the Secretary of State, you know, had stayed in Lausanne, you know, for a whole week, just waiting for the final agreement on the framework. Actually, there are lots of obstacles, at least three you just mentioned. The first is the, you know, when is the time for the lifting of sanctions against Iran from the Western countries. The second is the U.S. Congress. You know, they actually you know, has been against the attitude adopted by President Obama. And third is the countries in the Middle East, Iran, Iraq, and Israel, and also Saudi Arabia.
Well,
they also adopted a very different attitude toward the nuclear issue in Iran.
So let me explore some of these points you have just mentioned, which I guess the other two guests also touch on. To Professor Tanter, since you arrived late, and let me ask you this. What about the sanctions? Of course, the lame duck president, together with the fight on the Capitol Hill, we are all well known. That is the most well-known political story in the world, I think, in these days. The thing is, this deal, it has a lot to do with the future of the Gulf region. It has a lot to do with America's future, with Iran as well. Will politicians be able to go beyond what they have already termed as their political interests?
Well, congressionally, the congressional review legislation called the Corker-Cardin compromise with the White House gives the Congress a role in making sure that the president doesn't try to roll back the congressionally mandated sanctions before he gets some kind of authorization from the Congress. I'm not so sure that that will work because the sanctions are already beginning to erode. China is trying to cut a deal. France is trying to cut deals. Germany is trying to cut deals. So that, in fact, President Morandi is correct when he says that the international community is supporting Iran in terms of business. But France is on both sides of this issue. France was also meeting with the two Mohammeds and King Salman in Riyadh to talk about what Iran is doing on the nuclear side. And France takes a very tough line with respect to the Iranian covert action operations in Iraq, in Syria, and in with respect to the Houthis in Yemen.
So your point is whether the United States will be able to take one further step. You think with the current political framework that has just passed by the Congress as to how it will do it in the future, it's impossible. I just want to have an adjective from you. Is it possible or not possible, sir?
It is possible for the sanctions to be lifted by the United Nations, and that would present something of a fait accompli for the U.S. Congress.
Okay.
And in addition, the U.S. Congress is trying its best to weigh in, but it only has 60 days after June 30th to weigh in. So I doubt whether the Congress will be able to block the sanctions.
Second thing is the Gulf nations, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the program, they all vow to have the same kind of capabilities of enriching uranium as Iran is permitted to do if there is going to be a deal struck between the United States and Iran. The thing is the United States going to feel comfortable about that? Saudi Arabia has its own enrichment program of uranium together with smaller Gulf states. What does that mean for the region?
It will take Saudi Arabia about 7 to 10 years to develop its own bomb. It is thought to be able to do so because it has the income, but the Saudis are spending over their budget. The Saudis are extracting oil at a very cost-ineffective method, process. And lastly, the Saudis have, I thought, paid for the Pakistani bond, but the Pakistanis are sort of playing ball with the Iranians right now on other issues, and the Turks are not cooperating as well either.
Well, it's a very complicated picture, but if you follow international news, what Professor Tanter just said really makes sense. Let me come back to you, Professor Morandi. Here's the thing. The distrust between your country, Iran, and many of the other Gulf countries is not something new. Also, the incapability of countries to reach a deal at this moment about the Iran nuclear deal is not something new. It is not the cause, but the symptom of long-time distrust. So if we are really going to address this issue, sir, let's just be frank here. We have to address this distrust issue. This is enormous topic. We cannot just fix that within a few seconds or minutes. But let me ask you, Professor Morandi. You have talked about your country, a dialogue mechanism in the Gulf countries, among the Gulf states. You have also talked about the future Iran might have foreign policy-wise with your neighbors. Any of this vision do you think might help, at least for now, for the possibility of a deal?
Well, the deal isn't between Iran and any of the countries in the Persian Gulf region. It will be between Iran and the P5+1. So definitely Iran will not allow these two different issues to be linked to one another. In the Persian Gulf region, actually, two key countries are very close to Iran. Oman is very much against the policies being pursued by Saudi Arabia and others. And Iraq, of course, is now a very key ally of Iran. The Iraqis, of course, are a legitimate government. They've had elections, and the Iranians support that government. On the other hand, for the Iranians, the problem is Saudi Arabia, basically, and the problem that Iran has with Saudi Arabia has nothing to do with anything but Saudi support for extremism across the board. And the Iranians have been trying to talk to the Saudis on numerous occasions. The Iranian foreign minister has gone to Saudi Arabia, the previous foreign minister, during the previous administration, and so far the Saudis have not given a favorable response. Instead of, for example, in Yemen, the Iranians are looking on with horror. According to the former UN representative,
we are going into the details of many of the stories.
And
the stories you have just mentioned, we're going to go into details if we have some specific topics to elaborate on. But for now, I want to come back to you, Mr. Tang. We heard both sides. In fact, there are many sides involved. The Gulf country nations are being invited to Washington, D.C. Later, they're going to Camp David, still have talks with President Barack Obama. But it seems that the U.S. traditional allies, the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia included, and also Israel, are not happy about the deal. How much is there the Obama administration could do to maintain this legacy, if it ever has one, and also to maintain a relationship with this country?
Actually, the David Camp summit, between the United States and the GCC countries is a forum for the countries concerned, to talk about the possibility to sign the final deal with Iran. You mentioned just now some of the countries had, for example, the leader from Saudi Arabia, denied to attend this summit. This just a gesture or signal to the United States. The relationship actually suffered a lot, between the United States and Saudi Arabia, just because, to some extent, of Iranian nuclear issue. The policy adopted by the President Obama.
The question is how much space the Obama administration could still explore. That is the question. If you can, two sentences, if you can, sir.
I think Obama, just failed to give a very, constructive, role in the Middle East to maintain the peace and stability. And actually, after the withdrawal of the U.S. troops from Iraq, the power transition actually today is under its way. So I don't think President Obama can pursue it this time in David campus to pursue it to the countries
well, in Camp David, I'm sure a lot of things are going to happen, but as you just said, sir, the changes are taking place dramatically in the region.
It's not easy.
And maybe Washington needs to feel the pulse better in order to deal with some of the, in a way, most important issues. But we want to thank the three of you for coming over to our discussion. This is going to be an ongoing discussion for quite some time, I'm sure. Professor Raymond Tanter from Washington, from University of Michigan, in fact, and Professor Mohammad Marandi from Tehran, and Mr. Teng Juanxin here with us in Beijing. Thank you very much, gentlemen, the three of you. Thank you.